We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
In the summer of 1787, 55 men would gather in Philadelphia. They were tasked with fixing the government of the United States of America. Over the course of 4 months, they would debate, argue, refine and prepare the first document of its kind in the history of mankind, an attempt to prove that men can rule themselves by law. Over the next 3 years, the 13 United States would debate the ratification. This is the story of those men and of those times. It is a look at the ideas, the concepts, the debates, and the history of the Constitution of the United States. This is Constitution Thursday.
The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. That is the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, and it is where we turn today on Constitution Thursday. I'm Dave Bowman, and this is, of course, Plausibly Live, the Dave Bowman Show, and we take a look at the Constitution of the United States, what it means, why it was written the way it was, what it said, why it says that, and how it affects you today. A loqui conitio, stand up, tell those who oppose liberty, don't tread on me. So I want to take you on a little journey, if you will. Let's take a little trip, shall we? I guess a trip is the wrong word. Let's do a thought experiment. I guess that's a better way of putting it, a better way of approaching this. Some role-playing, I suppose you could call it that if you wanted to, whatever you want to call it. Let's do some pretending. Imagine, if you will, that you live in, I don't know, pick a town, small town USA. In the upper Midwest, no doubt, a typical American town where everything is, everybody, it's a small enough town where everybody knows their neighbors. And even those that you don't know personally, you at least know who they are. You probably do business with them. You've gotten along for years. There's not a lot of violent crime here. You have a bank, you got a gas station, you got a contractor, that kind of town. Now, some of you may not have any experience living in a town like that. I did for a couple of years. Wasn't my forte, as it turns out. I'm a real city kid. I like the big cities. But as it is, a lot of people live in these kinds of towns. A lot of people live in these kind of places. So imagine that you do. You live in that kind of place. And it's just a normal day. And you are just being your normal self. Now, I want to be clear about this. You are not a criminal. You have done nothing illegal. I'm not going to get into the immorality of what you're doing, but because really maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Who am I to judge? You have the internet just like everybody else does, and you use the internet for both educational and entertainment type purposes, as well as for perhaps, your banking, your work, whatever. We like we all do. And maybe there's things on your computer that you wouldn't want anybody else to see. They're not illegal. I want to be clear about this. There's no reason to believe or even think that you've done something wrong. No, what they would call probable cause. You haven't, in fact, done anything wrong. Maybe there's stuff there that you don't want, however. Information, whatever. Imagine it could be that you don't want there. Maybe it's your 1,500-page rock and roll novel that you really don't want to share with anybody because, copyrights, and you don't want people stealing your ideas and all that kind of stuff. All of this can be there. And one day you're sitting at home, quietly minding your own business as you're wont to do in small town USA, and there's a knock at the door. And you get up and you go answer it, and it's a police officer. And he's standing there with a warrant, a search warrant for your computer. He wants to see what's on your computer, and specifically, he wants to search your search engine results. He wants to know what you've been looking for on the internet. Now again, remember, there's no reason to believe or even suspect that you have done anything at all illegal. None whatsoever. And as you're standing there kind of with your mouth agape because you're thinking to yourself in the back of your mind, wait, this seems wrong to me. You kind of look around the neighborhood and you notice that all the other houses, the old lady across the street, the pastor who lives, 2 doors down on the right, the young married couple that lives over there, the neighbor that you've had for 20 years that you have barbecues with on Saturday nights and in the summertime. Everybody in this neighborhood has a police officer on their porch with a search warrant and is basically demanding the same thing. I want to see your Google search results for the past month. There's no reason to believe that any of you have done anything wrong. None whatsoever. And so your minds are kind of going, and your mind is kind of going, what the heck is going on here? I mean, first off, don't they have to have, some kind of probable cause to issue a search warrant? Who gave an oath or an affirmation saying that there's reason for searching my computer? And what kind of idiot judge would sign off on a warrant like that with absolutely no probable cause whatsoever? What is going on here? Now, you might tell me that, no, Dave, this would never happen. I mean, first off, cops got better things to do. They're not going to send a cop to everybody's house to do this, as you well know. They're going to send a letter to Google saying, give us this information. And you might be saying to yourself, Dave, no judge would sign off on that anyway. That's insane. That's crazy. Nobody would do that. That's what you would tell me, right? Right? That's what you would tell me. This is a far-fetched, impossible scenario, isn't it? And so we go to a little town called Edina, Minnesota. In Edina, Minnesota, there's a man who lives there. We don't know his name. And this man had a line of credit at a local bank there. And one day he was sitting at home and he got a call from the bank saying, hey, somebody just withdrew $28,000 from your line of credit. And we're feeling like we kind of got scammed on this deal. Can you come talk to us for a minute? And of course, it turns out that the bank had been scammed and you were out $28,500, or your neighbor is out $28,500 from some folks who tricked the bank into giving them the money off your line of credit. Now, obviously, this is a crime. Obviously, this needs to be investigated by the police, and obviously they hope to solve this crime and get your money back. But before we go any further, let's keep a few things in mind here. One person is harmed by all of this. And while that sucks for him, and I'm not taking anything away from that, we need to keep that in mind, that this is one person who got, hosed over by these thieves. Now, how the thieves did this is kind of interesting. When they called the bank, they used they called the bank and said, hey, I'm so-and-so. The bank said, we're not so sure. Send us some information that proves that you are you. And so they did. They sent them, social security numbers, that kind of stuff. Obviously stuff that had been stolen. But they also included in that an expired passport that, the picture of the passport that proved, quote unquote, that I'm me, the guy in question. And so the bank, following its protocol, said, okay, great, off you go, and gave him the $28,500. Now, again, there's plenty of mistakes here. There's plenty of room for consideration and concern here. But ultimately, the police were able to determine that the thieves got this photograph, this specific photograph of a guy that wasn't the guy whose money was stolen, but he looked just like him, looked real close to him, from the internet, specifically from Google. In fact, we know because of computer forensics that it was found on Google, not Bing, not Yahoo. Now that's kind of an important distinction here, because normally you think about when something's on the internet, it just is. And for technology people and people that use the internet a lot, it's intriguing to know that the three main search engines are not the same. They don't come up with the same things. Anyway, they knew that this photograph was got. They did a search on, an image search on Google and found it. And they used it on this fake passport that got them the money. The police then decided that they have to, solve this crime. Okay? All we got to do, they figured, to solve this in a very Sherlock Holmesian type moment, to solve this crime, all we need to do is find the computer that Googled this guy's name and this picture, and then we'll know who downloaded it and who used it on the fake passport. Ta-da! I mean, you gotta give their logic some applause, right? It's an amazing leap to figure that out. Problem is, they don't know who did it. The problem is they have no clue who did it. The problem is they have no way of even knowing who did it. So they did what you would do in a situation like that. They wrote a letter to Google. It's called an administrative request. It's not a warrant. It's not signed by a judge. It's just a request. They sent a request to Google saying, hey, can you tell us who searched for this guy's name, and they gave him the name, between this date and this date? It's about a month, December of 2016 into January 7th or so of 2017. Can you tell us everybody who searched for that name? Now, oddly enough, Google said, no, we're not doing that. I mean, really, if police departments can just write letters to Google and say, can you tell us everybody that searched for, I don't know, pick a crime, bank robbery, murder, how to kill my husband, how to kill my wife, how to, do whatever, and we're supposed to send that to you without any consideration, that's going to be a problem. Because again, just because somebody Googles something doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing that, right? I mean, we've all accidentally clicked on something that we didn't necessarily want to, right? It's in our search, it's in our histories of our computers or whatever. We've all had that moment, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, he said knowingly. And we really wouldn't be happy if everybody else found out about it. So Google said, no, we're not giving you that. So the Edwina police went back to a judge and they said, okay, we need a search warrant. And what we need is a search warrant for every, well, in essence, we need a search warrant for every computer. But it doesn't say that. What it says is we want a search warrant that tells Google, that compels Google to give us this information. So that Google has to do the legwork, has to, push a button or whatever and call up this list of everybody that searched for this name between this date and this date. And then we'll go through that list and figure out who the bad guy is. Now, I'm assuming, that the cops are thinking that maybe 3 or 4 people did this, that actually Googled this guy's name. That's what I'm assuming. But how do we know that? How do we know it wasn't 5,000 people or 20,000 people? How do we know that everybody in Edina, Minnesota, didn't Google this guy's name? Because maybe he's, a big business in Edina. We don't know. I'm assuming the police are thinking this guy's a nobody and doesn't even have he obviously has something on the web because they were able to get his information. But at the same time, there's a real gray area here. In fact, it's so gray, it's almost charcoal as to how many people you think might have Googled this name versus how many people have Googled this name. Do you start to see the difference there? Do you start to understand the problem? Now, the Fourth Amendment says that the police have to give an oath, an affirmation. They have to give some probable reason to do this. They have to come up with a reasonable way. And in looking at this, can you see in any way, shape, or form a reasonable way for Google to hand over potentially thousands of names and account information, presumably addresses, maybe phone numbers that go with that, to the Edina police because they think they might find the person who did this. Maybe, if they can, connect the dots. They haven't done it yet, by the way. They don't have a suspect at all. Nobody in the potential area that they're looking at is thought to be the person who did this. They don't know. They're just basically throwing a net out and going, well, let's see what we catch. If we catch enough people, round up the usual suspects, maybe one of them will actually be the one that did it. We might get lucky kind of approach to this. Do you start to see the problem here? So they took it to the judge, and the judge looked at it and laughed. He said, "Are you out of your freaking minds? Not a chance. What are you, drunk?" The judge said. And of course the police officer was embarrassed and said, "No, Your Honor, it was just a shot in the dark. We're just trying, we're just trying to get the guy his money back and blah, blah, blah." Well, that's what you would hope would happen. It's not what actually happened. What actually happened was the judge said, "You know what, this makes sense." And he signed off on it. And the warrant was sent to Google with instructions to provide to the Edina Police Department in Minnesota all of this information about everyone who might or who may have Googled this guy's name over the period of a month. We don't know anything about him. Maybe he's got an ex-girlfriend who's stalking him. Maybe, we've all done that. I mean, who doesn't have an ex somewhere in their life that you haven't looked them up on Facebook or whatever? What if he runs a business and people were Googling his business to see what kind of ratings it has or what kind of whatever it has so that we can decide whether or not we want to use that business? What if he's a person of interest? What if his name shows up in Google searches because, maybe he's a podcaster? Maybe he's a writer. We don't know. We have no idea. Now, I'm assuming that the police know. I'm assuming that they told the judge all this. But the judge said, it's okay. Go right ahead and look for everyone. Tell Google to give you the information for everyone. And, of course, then they sent the warrant off to Google, which, of course, being Google, now it's not an administrative request. Now it's an actual warrant. Google looked at that and said immediately, well, let's get right on this and get this over to the Edina Police. Why do I keep calling it Edina? Edina Police. And let them find their man, or men as the case may be, or women as the case might be. This $28,000 isn't going to find itself, right? That's what you might be afraid would happen. What actually happened was Google said, no, we're not doing this. And they hired their legal department and got their legal department to stand up and challenge the validity of this warrant. Because again, it is a far-fetched warrant. There's no probable cause to believe that anybody who searched this name did this. There's a theory that the criminals who did it might have used Google to find his name. In fact, we're pretty sure that they found this image online because we found it online, so therefore they must have found it online too. So QED, we need to search everybody. And then we'll find that computer and we'll come up with that. Google has refused it. They're not going to, they don't want to do this, and they want to fight this in court. The problem, of course, is what happens if what's the precedent here if the appeals courts ultimately uphold this and say, well, sure, yeah, this is fine. This is good. This is great police work. What happens then? What happens the next time something happens? A terrorist attack. Let's take that for an example because it's in the news these days. What happens if there's a terrorist attack and the local police, wherever, who are charged with investigating that crime, decide that they're just going to search everybody in the country that Googled, how to use an AK-47? What happens if there is a bank robbery or a kidnapping or an unsolvable, God help us not, but a murder? What happens when we start, another Casey Anthony? What happens when we start Googling everybody and we find out everybody that searched all this stuff. And now all of a sudden, instead of one, person that we're focusing on looking at the crime, now all of a sudden we have this dragnet of 50, 60, 100, 1,000, 10,000 or more people who may have looked at that information. And all of a sudden, we got more potential leads, and I'm doing the air quote thing here, than we could possibly imagine. What if some of them are plotting crimes that are completely unrelated, but they haven't committed those crimes yet? Maybe they were just thinking about it. Right? I mean, insert your own marriage joke here, right? There's any number of potential hazards down this. And again, I believe judges are supposed to think about the future. They're supposed to think about, okay, if I rule on this way, what is the long-term effect of that? And this judge clearly did not think that way. What happens? Okay, well, what happens if they do this and they do find the bad guys and he gets his $28,000 back? Is your Fourth Amendment right to be secure in your persons, your houses, your papers, and your effects worth $28,500 for some guy in Edina, Minnesota? What if they don't find him? What happens if they go through all of this and they don't find him? And now the Edina police is in possession of all this information that they got from Google. Now, Google is a company, and they have a vested interest in maintaining privacy. It's possible that they could release it, but the likelihood is much lower. There's no benefit to Google to blackmailing you because you searched for, www.hotwomensfeet.com or whatever. There's no benefit to Google for doing that. But now all of a sudden, if the local police in your small town USA know that you like to look at that, what happens? Yeah, you haven't committed a crime, you haven't done anything wrong, but they know something you don't know that they know. And how does that affect their doing? Moreover, how do we keep them from releasing that information? Maybe your political involvement. Maybe you want to speak at a city council meeting and you want to say something on it, and somebody writes something on a piece of paper and hands it to you. And all of a sudden, you're dissuaded from speaking. These are the kind of things that could potentially happen. And again, all of this is being given away, potentially, over $28,500 in Edina, Minnesota, for a guy that probably, I'm assuming, has insurance on this whole thing, and the bank certainly does. I'm all of that. The probable cause standard here is so missing, so absent from this, that you wonder, how in the world would a judge ever look at this and see the logic of it? I don't really care if the judge is liberal, conservative, whatever. As it turns out, he's a state-appointed judge. It doesn't matter. But when we have judges that look at this and go, well, sure, that makes sense, we've kind of crossed the Rubicon, haven't we? Have we gone a little bit too far in saying solving a crime is so much more important than protecting fundamental constitutional rights? Of course, this is part of the problem that I have with the whole, particularly here in California. I can't speak for Minnesota or anywhere else, but here in California, it's part of the problem we have with the DA system and the preliminary hearing system, and in other places, the criminal grand jury system. We're so focused on criminal activity, solving crimes, that sometimes we forget that there's a process that has to be followed. Now, I know police officers are going to react to that negatively. There's, Dave, we always follow that. And I'm sure you do. I'm absolutely certain that you do. But here's an actual case out of Edina, Minnesota, where the police department has requested a search warrant for Google to give up information with zero probable cause, none whatsoever. And the question that I would ask to any police officer that says to me, oh, Dave, they're just doing it, would you give up, would you be okay with your Fourth Amendment right being violated for this? And if you would, why? Now, I know the argument always goes, well, if you got nothing to hide, you got nothing to worry about. Yeah, well, when you think about who first said that, then you start looking at that comment a little bit differently. When you realize that came from Joseph Goebbels and Nazi Germany. And I realize that's Godwin's law, so maybe I lose the argument. But reality is, it's a fundamental constitutional right for a reason. It limits the government's ability to gain information or gain materials that might be used to harass and or punish a citizen. And if the government doesn't like that, well, then maybe the government should make an effort to change the Fourth Amendment. Or maybe we should make the effort to change the Fourth Amendment and give the government more power. But the fact of the matter is, they don't have that. Except when a judge says, well, there's no probable cause here. There's no reason to do this. There's no way in the world this is going to work. So sure, I'll sign off on that warrant and send it on to Google. Now look, it's I had an interesting conversation earlier today about the dislike of major corporations. But this is one of those cases where I think Google has our back. Google is looking at this going, no, this is going to set a bad, scary precedent. And precedents are difficult to back away from. And if this is allowed to go on, what's to stop it next week? And what's to stop that day from coming when the police officers are knocking on your door saying, so we got a search warrant here for your computer, and specifically your searches and your computer, because in the middle of another dragnet where we got just a general search warrant for everything, your name came up as potentially having something on your computer that we object to or we don't like, or that might be indicative of a crime that might be committed or might not be committed. So we want your computer and we want to look at your information. That's the direction we're headed. All over $28,000 in a podunk town in Minnesota. At some point, we're going to have to step back and go, wait a sec. Is this really worth all of this? And why is it that, number one, why is it this judge didn't realize that when everybody in the business seems to understand that this is problematic? We've had some people here let me read you some quotes about it. It's unusual for a judge to sign off on a warrant that based probable cause on so few facts. It's much more usual for a search warrant to be used to gather evidence for a suspect that's already been identified instead of using evidence to find a suspect. If the standards for getting a broad warrant like this are not strong, you're going to have a lot of police fishing expeditions. One person said, this is the broadest warrant we've seen ever outside of the national security apparatus. It ought to scare us, folks, and it ought to cause us to concern and sit back and go, okay, this is how our Constitution works on an everyday basis. This is how it's affecting people's lives each and every day. And now, in a small town in Minnesota, we could be seeing a case that will decide for the next however many years that your local police department can just go on a fishing expedition to find out what you've been up to. Don't believe it won't happen? It's happening today in Edwina, Minnesota, right now, even as we speak. Take the time right now, tell the people that matter in your life you love them very much. You'd miss them if they weren't there, so don't pass up those opportunities. You don't want to have that regret. Plausibly Live, this is the Dave Bowman Show on Constitution Thursday.
Constitution Thursday is a feature segment on Plausibly Live, the official podcast of The Dave Bowman Show, a Slippery Fish Entertainment production for the Podcast 99 Network. Copyright MMXV. All rights reserved. For more information, log on to constitutionthursday.com.